Welcome to DrJLT Economics. I'm Dr. Julin Tong. In today's episode, I want to follow up on yesterday's episode, during which I talked about three causes why I believe that the European Union is entering a decade of stagnation. In today's episode, I want to talk about, in my judgment, what might be ways to alleviate the suffering from this stagnation, and how the European Union may be able to dig itself out of this period of stagnation. But I also must preface today's discussion with the admission that I do not foresee that the European Union, with the current set of politics, and also with all the domestic problems and the general populace at large, I do not foresee that the EU will be able to take much, if any, of these suggestions. And I think ultimately, unfortunately, regrettably, the European Union is very likely to fall apart after perhaps just 1 or 2 decades. Within 2 decades, very likely it's going to fall apart. And most European citizens will be worse off because of it. Now I just want to quickly remind my listeners what the 3 points that I raised yesterday, the 3 causes of EU's decade of stagnation. The first is the distortion of market signals from EU-conceived regulations. The second is irresponsible fiscal policies combined with a poorly designed Eurozone. And thirdly, there is also a huge, very wasteful overhead in the form of bureaucracy. Now, if you think about it, these 3 points have 3 very easy to come up with solutions. But they are also some of the most difficult to implement. And I do not really think that implementing them can be easy as it is to think of it. But nevertheless, I want to enumerate them, and I want to also discuss a little bit about them. So the first point, in response to overregulation, I believe the best way to deal with it is to really cost every regulation, and to have the principle that when a regulation cannot be economically justified, it must not be implemented. It should be cut. And by this, I also want to mention that I do not mean that we go back to the laissez-faire economics of the 19th century, the complete liberalism. That would not be the answer, in my judgment, because in today's times, we're facing some very urgent issues, such as overpopulation, such as climate change, such as energy, renewable energy, the need to have renewable energies, because the depletion of carbon-based energy could be inside, because the ecosystem, the destruction of ecosystems is really bringing us to a tipping point, and because the pollution is causing really significant prices in terms of human life and also wildlife. I do not mean that we ignore these issues. Instead, I believe that we should price them in, and together with the social surpluses, the externalities, everything, and make a costed model of regulation, so that regulations are not implemented as a result of what is the most popular opinion. Because, and this is something that we must admit if we are to be honest, because the populations are very easily driven by a popularity contest in a democracy. But the population are not necessarily the best informed, and frequently they are misinformed. The population do not necessarily have the interests of, especially the mid to long-term interests of the globe at heart. They tend to have their short-term personal interest at heart. And in this context, democracy becomes a simple vote who is the most popular, which regulation is the most popular. But the most popular regulations in the short run could be the most costly in the long run. And we only have to look back in our immediate histories to find examples where a lot of the most popular policies turned out to be, in later generations, be found out to be not only bad for the people who voted for them, but also cause lasting legacies that are very difficult to reverse. I'm not going to go to too much details, but I personally think that this is impossible to implement in the European Union, because in the European Union there is this fantasy about democracy, and I think this is going to mean that nothing really good, nothing revolutionary gets done, because everything is just a popularity contest. Secondly, in response to the problem with fiscal policies, irresponsible fiscal policies, and the problem with Eurozone, I suggest very simply to default on the debt, to default on the debt, to stop quantitative easing, and finally to make a flexible to implement a flexible exchange mechanism for countries to exit the Eurozone very easily. They can enter again in the future, but there must be an entry and exit mechanism. Let me just briefly elaborate on this a little bit, because I want to make another episode purely talking about the Eurozone and the Euro crisis. I think it's very important to default on the debt, because to have the debt overhanging a lot of the economies, especially in Southern Europe, such as Greece, Italy, these countries can never, within the Eurozone, develop. With half of Europe in perpetual stagnation, it is impossible for the European Union to develop. And there's going to be increasing social tensions, and there's going to be if the current system continues, after the fall of the European Union, we could very well see some military conflict erupt because of a complete generation being destroyed due to these policies. So it is very important for the European Union, for countries, for the nation states within the EU to default on their debt. If they can repay, of course they repay. But if they cannot repay, in the case of Greece, in the case of Italy, and many others, I'm not going to enumerate. They each have to make their own judgment, but the most obvious ones are Italy and Greece. They need to default on their debt, and that's just the very first step that must be taken. And secondly, I think, of course, the ECB needs to stop the quantitative easing program. That brings no benefit except to the very rich, And in the case of the EU, in fact, not so much, not as much to the very rich either, because most of the benefits goes to multi-internationals, which have become less and less owned by the Europeans, simply because of the stagnation that has been the result of their poor economic policies. And if this is to continue, if the EU is going to be in prolonged stagnation, this is going to be even worse. And eventually what's going to happen is that Europe will become impoverished, and it will become no better than where the Middle East is today. Remember, a lot of Europeans, of course, have bought deeply into the propaganda, the basically racist propaganda. They think that they are somewhat superior because they are chosen by God. This is not the case, because even millennia before Jesus Christ was born, in the Middle East there were civilizations that were quite advanced, and even just before, just a few centuries ago, that region was also one of the richest in the world. So now, of course, we say that the Middle East is backward, but nothing is stopping Europe from becoming a backwards region. If you keep on doing QE, you're gonna just destroy your civilization. That's really well, whatever. And finally, I think it's very important to have an entry and an exit mechanism for the Eurozone, because and this is precisely something that I want to talk about in another episode, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But the thing is that when a nation state defaults on the debt denominated most likely in euro, in order for it to be able to borrow again, in order for it to of course, its debt burden is cut, and hopefully also cuts regulation and cuts taxes and provides incentives for the economy to start growing again. It probably needs it to have its own monetary policies, and it's very important for that country to have its own currency, and that means a temporary, perhaps, exit from the Eurozone. As it's constructed, the Eurozone is a straitjacket. It's a straitjacket for a lot of countries, and there is no good solution within it. And finally, with regards to bureaucracy, by the way, about these 3 points that I just mentioned, I think there is small chance that some of these could happen. I still, of course, I don't have high hopes. I think maybe in some countries such as Greece or Italy, maybe there will be enough popular support to default on the debt and perhaps to exit the Eurozone, but not necessarily in an orderly fashion in the way that I describe, but perhaps in an orderly fashion, which it could actually be less effective, but nevertheless, that's what I foresee. So thirdly, with regards to bureaucracy, I think, again, very similar to the first point, I think bureaucracy should exist insofar as it brings more value than it is cost. And so every amount, every bit of bureaucracy must be costed. But of course, I don't want to go too much into this. I think in every government, this is not limited to the European Union. In every government, there should be the principle where bureaucracy or government is introduced only if the government adds more value than it is cost. But this notion is very simple, but we have a couple of problems here. One is that it's very difficult to cost a bureaucracy, and it's very difficult to measure the value that it brings. And this makes it very likely for big government politicians simply to make numbers up, and they are going to commission some consultants that will come up fanciful numbers that never reflect reality, but this will be used to justify bureaucracy. And that's, again, of course, it's not what I'm suggesting. So this is one of the problem. And secondly, of course, politics concedes no power, right? Once power is gained, it never lets go. And so when European Union currently has this big top-heavy bureaucracy, to ask the bureaucracy to willingly give up power is unrealistic. So I personally don't think there could be a lot of hope in the European Union cutting its bureaucracy. I think really in most nations across history, what happens is that there is a revolution, a new country, a new nation is born. And in the beginning, this nation possibly has a smaller bureaucracy, a smaller political elite. But over time, the bureaucracy grows, the political elites become entrenched in the system, and they never let go, and the system grows bigger and bigger and bigger until it is so top heavy that the entire system crumbles from below. And that, I think, will be the final. That will be the final stage of a nation where, only from its ruins can a new nation be reborn, and perhaps, hopefully, less bureaucratic, and it will have a lot of vitality as a younger nation, and it will develop much faster out of the ruins of the former of its former self. And I think very likely the European Union is at this stage. So overall, as you can see, I've made three kind of suggestions, three ways where we can look at solutions for EU's upcoming decade of stagnation. I'm not hopeful. I'm not optimistic. I think the European Union, because of the problems that I have mentioned in this video, in this episode, simply is unable to implement these policies. The only place where I see some hope is in the default on national debt, and perhaps the exit from the Eurozone by some countries. But that, I think, is not enough. Although for the countries that carry out these actions, perhaps for them there will be a boost in the short term. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at DrJLT. You can also find me on my website, DrJLT.com and neofiliac.com, NEOFILIAC.com. Thank you.